comments. If you think we're being unrealistic with this, tell me now, tell me later, send me an email, send me a letter, whatever. All that information goes before the board, the health commissioner, and then they give due consideration to your concerns about that stuff. So those are what's being proposed. I do want to make sure that you understand this is not in effect today. It'll be in effect early in 2012. So everything you're doing today will stay the same until early 2012. So just keep that in mind. You'll probably see, if you read the repository religiously, there'll be a posting of publication there. We will also be sending out copies of what you just received in the mail to you, so you can, if the service provider's not here, they'll see it. So everybody will at least have a view of it. So anyway, those are the fees that are associated with the regulations that we just went over. And Laura, I'll have you, if anybody came in late and needs a card, I'll have Laura pass those out. Just as a reminder, we want to do name a company, your name, who you are with the company, and then help us out by giving us a question that you might want answered in the future, so that we can prepare some additional presentations for the future. So any written comments you have regarding anything that we've discussed with the regulation revisions and fee revisions, there's my address. You all know how to call me and get a hold of me. Never have a problem doing that. So do that. Tell us what you're thinking. Tell us if you have a better way to handle this. We'd love to hear about it. So that's that information. Before we segue into what Ross Pattison's come to give us a presentation on pumps and controls, I do want to show you an interesting thing. This is off the subject of regulations and whatnot now. I do want to show you something that was interesting that's happened here recently. I thought this was pretty slick. We had an Amish school. Their soil was bad. They needed a mound. They don't use electricity. So that became a bit problematic. So the first thing that we looked at was maybe using a flout. Maybe putting the mound downhill and then letting a gravity surge dose go into. Some of you use them, some of you have seen those devices. Well, down the hill from the schoolhouse was junk soil, so they couldn't do that. So they had to bring the system up the hill, and those folks are pretty clever, pretty creative. So we had a gentleman design for them using an air-powered pump. They're not completely without the necessities. They use gas-powered generators to power a huge air compressor that they run everything on, pretty much. They run the water well on it many times. And this Amish school is going to be running an air-powered pump to pump sewage effluent up into a mound off of it. So this was the first time we've ever seen one of these happen, so we try to scrutinize it very carefully. I just want to show you, I know you can hardly probably see those graphs. Normally you're accustomed to seeing a pump curve on a pump. Well, this one takes into consideration gallons per minute, which we're normally seeing, and then the PSI. So we need to know how many PSI the pump is going to produce, and then also above it, on this dash line, which you don't see on an electric pump, is how much air consumption they're going to use. I couldn't believe how much air this thing was going to use to run. But they tell me they got a huge tank to handle this. I was just making a comparison for just a impact wrench and what that uses. It's like over 10 times the amount of air that an impact wrench uses to run this pump. So they got to have huge volumes of air to be able to run this, and they do. So interesting thing, as far as the controls are concerned, they got two ways to do a high water alarm. They can do a DC control panel for high water, or they simply stick a float on a stick. And the stick goes up and down inside the tank, and you can see how high the water level is. They've chose the DC controls. And then the event counter, we still wanted to have the event counter. They're using a mechanically controlled event counter, similar to what the flout uses. If you're familiar with that, it has a little ball float that just ticks off one tick every time it rises and falls. So they do have an event counter on this also. Pretty interesting stuff, and I think that might be a decent segue into what we have to see here next.
You guys have your cards, I'll take them. If you need a pen, I'll try to find.
Thank you.
If you don't turn them in, I won't know you're here and you won't get your CEU, so. Pretty please, I can get the rest.
Oh, yeah. Yes, sir. I'm a janitor. I clean up all the messes. Yeah. Thank you. It should say panel seminar. Yep.
What?
Everyone, I'd like to introduce to you Ross Pattison, who you might know. He used to be with Easy Flow until Infiltrator bought it out, and Ross had to move on to bigger and better things. And then Dave Baker, both with OEC, and that stands for
Ohio Electric Control.
Ohio Electric Controls. They're going to give us a talk on floats, controls, and pumps.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know everybody's pretty busy these days with trying to get stuff installed before the winter starts to fly and the snow is going to be hitting us here pretty soon. So I appreciate you taking your time. It's very valuable to us. So what I just want to do here this morning is kind of give you a quick overview of control panels and the things that we look for when we build control panels and the things that are important to know. If I start to go too fast, please, raise your hand, stop me if you have any questions along the way, and we'll see what we can do to keep those answered. And the information that I have up on the screen, we have a copy of that in your hands, and Ross was just passing it out. One of the first things when we talk about control panels that's important to know is what voltage is your control panel actually built for, or what voltage are you looking at when you open that control panel. And one of the first things you look at when you look at voltage is the amplitude. That's the 120 volt, 230 volt, or 480 volt in most cases that you'll see in a lot of the American control panels and voltage systems. They would show that 120, 240, and 480. And that just deals with the size of this waveform. Peak to peak, this shows you the 480 volt as opposed to a 240 peak to peak or 120 volt peak to peak. The next thing that you need to know with the voltage is what phase it is. Is it single phase or is it three phase? Single phase panels are always going to have a neutral, so you'll have a way to derive your 120 volt power from a single phase panel. But if we get into a three phase situation where you actually have the three waves interposed on each other like so, you're in a lot of cases are going to need some type of a transformer inside the panel to get the 120 volt control circuits that we use for the controls. Another thing that's important about voltage, you'll hear people talk about a delta or a Y system or a star system. And if you look at the way the two forms are done here, this is just basically the transformer sits on a pole. A delta system has three windings of the transformer connected in that type of pattern. And then the Y configuration is like this. You notice in the Y configuration it's a 4-wire, and the center tap of those windings gives you your neutral voltage. So when you measure from one line to neutral, you're measuring one of these legs, and you're going to get your 120 volt. Most of the frequency you're going to deal with in the United States is what they call 60 hertz. Does anybody know why they call it hertz? Because if you've ever touched it, it doesn't tickle. That's one joke I'll do today. But it actually deals with the time frame for one of these wave patterns to happen from 0 up to the high peak, back down to 0. That's your frequency. And the reason I say that is a lot of the systems that we deal with use a generator as a backup system.